Hello everyone and welcome back to Anomalous Archive, where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you are listening to my videos from, since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for helping me reach to 50 subscribers. Let's reach 100 subscribers before the end of January. So sit back, relax and enjoy. The old brick house on the outskirts of the city seemed frozen in the windless winter twilight. Snow that had fallen overnight had turned the peeling cornices into snowy white beards and the arched window frames into frosted eyebrows of a grumpy giant. Emily shivered as she looked at the dark gaps of the entrance arches. There was something off about this house, something subtly strange, as if it wasn't just standing there but was watching them. 8-year-old Daisy tightened her grip on her mother's hand. "Mom, is it really ours?" the girl asked quietly, tilting her head to look up at the 4th floor, where the windows of their new apartment loomed darkly. "Of course, sweetheart. It's our house now." Emily tried to make her voice sound confident. "Look how beautiful it is, just like a fairy tale." Daisy remained silent. For some reason, she was reminded of rather grim fairy tales, old stories about witches in huts and enchanted castles, where shadows lurked around every corner and watchful eyes hid in the darkness of the corridors. The heavy entrance door gave way with a drawn-out creak. In the dim vestibule, it smelled of dampness and, strangely, wormwood, a bitter scent unusual for winter. They ascended the first flight in complete silence, their footsteps echoing off the walls. On the 2nd floor landing, they were met by a short, gray-haired woman in a strict gray dress. "New neighbors." She smiled, and the wrinkles around her eyes gathered into rays. "I'm Catherine Bennett. I live on the 3rd floor. Let me help you with your things." "Thank you, but we'll manage," began Emily, but the woman had already grabbed one of the bags. "Nonsense. Around here, we help newcomers. This house is special," she winked at Daisy. "We're all like family here, especially around New Year's." As they climbed the stairs, Catherine Bennett talked about the house, the neighbors, and how they joyfully celebrated holidays. Her voice was soft and soothing, but Daisy, following behind, couldn't shake the feeling of a chill running down her spine. She had the impression that someone invisible and silent was creeping behind them in the shadows of the stairwell, intently listening to every word. On the 4th floor, Catherine Bennett stopped and set the bag by the door. "Settle in and rest. This evening, I'll expect you for tea. I'll tell you about our New Year's tradition." She smiled again, but this time, her smile seemed strange and forced to Daisy. The apartment greeted them with dust and stale air. Emily immediately opened the windows, letting in the frosty December air. Dusts of wind whirled snowflakes through the empty room, and Daisy thought they formed into translucent figures dancing between the walls. "Mom, look!" the girl exclaimed. But the snowflakes had already dispersed, leaving only damp marks on the worn parquet floor. "What is it, sweetie?" "Never mind. I must have imagined it." They began unpacking their things. Boxes filled with books, clothes, and dishes gradually emptied, and the apartment slowly started to resemble a home rather than an abandoned space. Yet, for some reason, the corners of the rooms remained dark, as if the afternoon sunlight couldn't reach them. In the children's room, Daisy placed her favorite toy, a plush cat named Snugglepaws, on the windowsill first thing. But half an hour later, she found him on the floor, even though she clearly remembered setting him securely between flower pots. "Mom, there's such a strong draft here," she called. "Snugglepaws keeps falling down." Emily came over to the window and checked the frame. "No, it's sealed tight. You must not have set him properly." By evening, they had more or less settled in. Emily was just thinking about making tea when there was a soft knock at the door. It's me. Catherine Bennett stood on the threshold with a large bag. I figured you must be tired and hungry. I just baked an apple pie. It felt awkward to refuse, and truthfully, they were both quite hungry. 15 minutes later, they were sitting in Catherine Bennett's cozy apartment. Everything here exuded warmth and a sort of old-fashioned solidity: heavy velvet curtains, a carved sideboard with dishes, and antique photographs on the walls. "Don't mind that our house looks gloomy from the outside," said the hostess, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups. "It only seems that way. In reality, it's very kind and takes care of its residents. The main thing is to respect its traditions." Daisy, warming her hands on a teacup, studied the photographs. One of them, yellowed with age, showed a little girl holding a paper sky lantern and smiling at the camera. There was something subtly sad about her smile. "Who is that?" Daisy asked. Catherine Bennett froze for a moment, her cup hovering in midair. A shadow passed over her face. "That's my daughter." "Where is she now?" the girl asked innocently. "Daisy." Emily scolded her, noticing how their hostess tensed. It's fine," Catherine Bennett set down her cup and slowly sank into an armchair. "She left many years ago, right around New Year's." A heavy silence hung in the room. Somewhere deep in the apartment, a clock ticked, the sound unnaturally loud. "Speaking of New Year's," Catherine Bennett seemed to shake off her stupor. "I promised to tell you about our tradition, didn't I?" She shifted in her chair. "Our house is special, and we celebrate New Year's in a special way. Every year, as soon as the clock strikes midnight, all the residents go out into the courtyard. Everyone, without exception." She emphasized those words. "And we release lanterns into the sky." "How beautiful!" Emily perked up. "Last year, we also released lanterns." "For us, it's not just entertainment," Catherine Bennett shook her head. "It's a tradition, an important one. I personally prepare the lanterns for every resident. They must all be identical and made just right." She stood up, walked to the wardrobe, and took out a lantern, carefully folded and wrapped in paper. "Like these." Catherine Bennett carefully unwrapped it. "They're not ordinary. They grant wishes." Daisy stared at the lantern in fascination. In the folds of the paper, she thought she saw patterns resembling faces. They seemed to appear and disappear as she focused on them. "And the wishes come true?" she asked in a whisper. Catherine Bennett slowly nodded. "They always come true. But you must wish wisely. And the most important thing." She suddenly fell silent, looking over their heads. Outside, a gust of wind shook the bare branch of an old maple tree, and shadows danced across the walls. "The most important thing?" Emily prompted. "The most important thing is that everyone must participate," Catherine Bennett said firmly, putting the lantern back into the box. "All the tenants. Otherwise, the wishes might come true incorrectly." "And what does incorrectly mean?" Daisy asked. "Well, for example," Catherine Bennett began, but suddenly a door slammed somewhere downstairs, and heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs. "Arthur Spencer is back," the hostess said with an oddly forced cheerfulness. "He lives on the first floor. Alone, ever since." And she broke off mid-sentence again. An awkward silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the sound of the wind outside. "It's so late already," Emily said, glancing at her watch. "We should go. There's still unpacking to do." Yes, of course," Catherine Bennett stood up. "But remember, you absolutely must follow the tradition. It's very important. Very." As they were leaving, Daisy turned around. She thought she saw a shadow flit behind Catherine Bennett in the dark corridor. Small, childlike. But before she could say anything, the door closed. On the landing, it was already dark. The bulb wasn't working. Somewhere below, footsteps and muffled muttering could be heard. "Mom," Daisy whispered, clutching her mother's hand tightly, "do we really have to light those lanterns?" Emily didn't answer. She herself couldn't shake off the strange sense of unease that had crept in after Catherine Bennett's story. Something unsaid lurked in her words. Something frightening hid between the lines of what seemed to be an innocent tale about a New Year's tradition. That night, Daisy had her first nightmare. She was standing in the yard of their new house. Snow fell in large, silent flakes, as though someone had turned off all the sounds in the world. In the sky, lights floated, dozens of paper lanterns, like fireflies. They rose higher and higher, then suddenly stopped. And then she saw it. A tall figure in a dark cloak. The figure stood on the roof, its unnaturally long arms reaching for the lanterns. In its hands was a sack, like the kind Santa Claus used to carry presents, but black. The lanterns flew into the sack, one by one. And inside the sack, someone was crying. Quietly, barely audibly. But the sound froze Daisy's heart. The figure slowly turned its head. Where its face should have been was a dark void, with only two small lights resembling lanterns glimmering where its eyes might be. It looked directly at Daisy, and... Daisy! Daisy, wake up! She opened her eyes. Emily was leaning over her, looking worried. "You were screaming in your sleep, sweetheart. Did you have a bad dream?" Daisy nodded, still trembling. Outside, snow was falling, just as silent as in the dream. On the windowsill sat her plush bear, Snugglepaws, but for some reason, he was turned to face the window, though Daisy was certain she had left him facing the room. "Mom, can I sleep with you tonight?" "Of course, sweetheart. Come on." Daisy slid out of bed but stopped at the door and looked at the window. She thought she saw the same silhouette in the falling snow, a dark figure with two glowing dots instead of eyes. But when she blinked, it was just snow and the bare branches of the old maple scratching the glass. By morning, Daisy had almost forgotten her dream. Almost. Something unpleasant, something unsettling lingered, like a residue at the bottom of a cup. She and her mother were having breakfast in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood a boy about her age, wearing a blue knit cap with reddish curls poking out. "Hi," he smiled. "I'm Logan. I live downstairs. My mom said we have new neighbors, and you'll be in my class after the holidays." Daisy smiled back hesitantly. "Want me to show you around?" Logan offered. "There are some cool places here. But," he lowered his voice, "don't go to the attic. Especially in December." "Why?" Logan glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Something lives there," he whispered. "Something scary. I saw it in my dream." Emily allowed Daisy to go for a walk with her new acquaintance, but asked them not to go far. The children settled on a wide windowsill on the third-floor landing, from where they could see the snow-covered yard. "So what did you dream about?" Daisy asked, wrapping herself in a warm sweater. "The same thing every time," Logan said, tracing a finger on the fogged-up glass. "Every December, I'm standing in the yard, and there's snow all around. And in the sky, lanterns. Lots and lots of lanterns. And someone's collecting them in a big black sack." Daisy flinched. "And that someone?" "He's in a black cloak." Logan turned sharply to her. "You saw him too?" "Last night. For the first time." "How long have you been seeing him?" 3 years, ever since we moved here. At first, I thought it was just nightmares. But then, he hesitated. Last year, I saw him not only in my dreams. What do you mean? Last New Year's, when we were releasing lanterns, Logan lowered his voice to a whisper. I saw him on the roof. And he was really collecting the lanterns in a bag. And then, the sound of a crash made both children jump. On the staircase stood a tall man with disheveled graying hair. At his feet lay a spilled bag of groceries. Telling stories again? He asked hoarsely, staring at Logan. His gaze was feverish, restless. Hello, Arthur Spencer, the boy muttered, shrinking. And you, the man shifted his gaze to Daisy. Are you from the new family on the 4th floor? Daisy nodded silently. His voice sounded strange, a mix of despair and anger. Tell your mother. He took a step closer, and the girl instinctively backed away. Tell her not to take part in this madness. Not to release those cursed lanterns. They take away the most precious things. Arthur Spencer, came the voice of Catherine Bennett from above. At it again? The man flinched as if struck, bent down, and with trembling hands began picking up the spilled groceries. I just don't want, he muttered. Don't want anyone else, like Mary and Alex. Children, go home, Catherine Bennett said firmly as she descended the stairs. There's no need to listen to such nonsense. Daisy and Logan hurried to their apartments. But before closing the door, Daisy caught a snippet of conversation on the staircase. You know, Arthur Spencer, Catherine Bennett's voice was cold. The tradition must not be broken. You remember what happened last time when you refused to participate? I remember, the man replied hollowly. I remember every day. Daisy shut the door and leaned her back against it. Fragments of thoughts spun in her mind, dreams, a dark figure, lanterns, a bag filled with the cries of children, and Arthur Spencer's eerie words, they take away the most precious things. That evening, after putting Daisy to bed, Emily sat down at her laptop. Something about this New Year's tradition and the neighbors' strange behavior unsettled her. Searching for information about the building revealed little of interest, just an old 5-story building from the 60s. But in the local news section from 5 years ago, she found a short article. Tragic incident on New Year's Eve. A woman and child perished in an accident. Emily scanned the text, Mary and Alex Baker. Their bodies were never found. The only witness, the husband and father, Arthur Spencer, claimed something incoherent about lights in the sky and a dark figure. The investigation ruled it an accident. There was a soft knock at the door. Daisy stood on the threshold, pale and distraught. Mom, I saw him again. In my dream. He was standing under our windows, showing me lanterns. And inside them were faces. Children's faces. Emily hugged her daughter, feeling her tremble. Outside, snow was falling. In its midst, for a moment, a dark silhouette emerged, holding something like a bag. Emily blinked, and once again, there was only the snowy haze and the dim light of street lamps. By December 31st, the building seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The snow had stopped, but the sky remained low and heavy, like a leaden lid over the courtyard. Emily spent the day torn between thoughts of leaving immediately or staying. Something told her it was too late to run. At 6 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Catherine Bennett stood there, holding 2 white paper lanterns. Here, she handed them to Emily. One for you and one for Daisy. Remember, at midnight sharp, we all gather in the courtyard. All of us, she emphasized. What if we don't come? Emily asked quietly. Catherine Bennett's smile turned sharp as a blade. Sweetheart, you don't want to find out what happens to those who break the tradition. When she left, Emily noticed crescent-shaped nail marks on her palms from clenching her fists too tightly. At 11 p.m., people began gathering in the courtyard. Emily watched them from the window, silent figures holding lanterns. Children clung to their parents. Arthur Spencer stood off to the side, hunched and staring at the ground. "Mom," Daisy tugged at her hand. "Mom, I'm scared. I saw him again. He's waiting for our lanterns." "I know, sweetheart," Emily hugged her daughter. "I saw him too." The clock struck midnight, and they descended to the courtyard. Catherine Bennett greeted them with a nod. In her hands was a lantern identical to the one in an old photo with her daughter. "It's time," she said. "Light your candles." The flames flickered to life, one by one. Emily helped Daisy light hers, then lit her own. The warm glow reflected in the eyes of the gathered crowd, but didn't warm them. "Make a wish," Catherine Bennett instructed, and released them. The lanterns rose into the sky, dozens of glowing orbs drifting higher and higher. And then... "No!" Daisy suddenly screamed. "Don't do it!" "I see them. In the lanterns, children. All the missing children." Indeed, it seemed that in the flickering light, faces became visible, translucent and sorrowful. They gazed down at their parents, silently moving their lips. Then, on the roof, a dark figure appeared, the one from the dreams. It spread its arms, and the sky seemed to split open, a black maw ready to swallow the lights. "Stop! Enough!" Daisy's voice rang out in the dead silence. "Catherine Bennett, stop! I know you're doing this for your daughter. But look, she's here too, in your lantern. And she doesn't want anyone else to disappear." Catherine Bennett froze, staring into her lantern. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Mia," she whispered. "Mia." The lantern's glow wavered, and the face of a little girl from the old photograph became clearer. She smiled, gently and sadly. "I just wanted to bring her back," Catherine Bennett's voice trembled. "Back then, 20 years ago, when I lost her. It came to me. It said it would help bring Mia back if I helped it collect souls. One child each year. And one day, when it had enough, Mia would return. But she doesn't want to come back at such a price." Daisy stepped toward the woman. "Look, she's crying because of what you're doing." In the flashlight's glow, Mia's face was indeed covered in tears. She reached out a transparent hand to her mother, as if begging her to stop. The dark figure on the roof stirred restlessly. Its cloak fluttered in an invisible wind, and its glowing eyes burned with rage. "Leave!" Daisy suddenly shouted, looking at the creature. "There's no more food for you here. We won't give you anyone." Catherine Bennett suddenly straightened, and determination appeared in her eyes. "Forgive me, my dear, forgive me." She tightened her grip on the flashlight. "I break the pact. Do you hear me? I break it." The flashlight in her hands flared with blinding light. Then others began to light up, one by one, brighter and brighter. The dark figure let out a monstrous scream. Its outline quivered, rippled like smoke in the wind, and then the creature dissolved into the night sky as if it had never existed. The lanterns drifted away into the distance, and before the last one went out, everyone gathered in the yard saw the children's souls smiling, bright and serene. Arthur Spencer sank to his knees, stretching his hands toward two small lights. Mary, Alex, and Catherine Bennett kept looking at the sky, where the light of her lantern was fading. "Goodbye, my dear," she whispered. "Now I know you were always with me. I just didn't want to see it." Snow began to fall again, soft and fluffy, covering the yard in a white blanket. People slowly dispersed to their homes. Some cried, while others smiled through their tears. A year later, on New Year's Eve, the residents gathered in the yard again. They launched ordinary paper lanterns, made ordinary wishes, and simply enjoyed the celebration. And somewhere high, high in the sky, the stars shimmered. Daisy, standing by her apartment window, occasionally saw light silhouettes in the falling snow. But now they didn't scare her. They simply said, "Thank you." And she smiled back at them. Large snowflakes slowly swirled outside the taxi window. Jacob Hayes glanced at his watch once again, 9:15 p.m. Less than 3 hours remained until the new year, and the festive city was already buzzing with pre-holiday bustle. Someone's bags filled with tangerines were perched on the back seat. The last couple had paid their fare and fluttered out of the car giggling, leaving behind the scent of pine and candies the girl had been fiddling with the entire ride. Jacob Hayes wearily rubbed his eyes. His phone vibrated yet again. It was surely his son or daughter calling to invite him to celebrate together. Better to keep working, he thought. A double fare, after all. And what would he do at a family celebration? Just get in the way. He parked by the curb, intending to check his messages, when someone cautiously tapped on the window. Outside stood a tall, gray-haired old man in a long dark coat. He held a worn paper bag carefully to his chest, as if it contained something very valuable. The old man gently settled into the back seat, placing the bag beside him. The car was immediately filled with the scent of frost and something faintly familiar, the smell of old Christmas ornaments from an attic. "Good evening," he said in a surprisingly youthful voice. "Sorry to trouble you, but I have a very unusual request. I need to deliver a few, let's call them packages, before midnight. I'll pay triple fare." Jacob Hayes was about to refuse. Who knows what these packages were, and the passenger seemed odd. But something in the old man's eyes stopped him. They were remarkably clear and radiated a special light, as if he knew something important that others didn't. "Here's the first address." The old man pulled out a parcel from the bag, tied with a red satin ribbon. "We need to be at the central square exactly at 9:30. Can we make it?" Jacob Hayes smirked. Triple fare for a few parcels? Then again, why not? A job's a job. To the square, then. He started the engine. "Just so you know, it's all blocked off for the holiday." "That's all right. We'll find a way to get through." The old man smiled faintly. The taxi merged into the stream of cars. The snow fell thicker, transforming the evening city into a blur of lights and shadows. They reached the square quickly. As Jacob Hayes had predicted, all access points were blocked. The festive crowd filled the central part of the city, where a giant Christmas tree towered. "No place to park here," he turned to the passenger. "Shall I drop you at the crosswalk?" No, we need to go over there." The old man pointed to a narrow alley between two stores. Surprisingly, there was indeed an open spot there, though Jacob Hayes could have sworn that alley hadn't been there before. The old man took the first parcel from the bag. Under the streetlights, the red ribbon shimmered faintly. "Now just wait a moment." He leaned slightly forward, peering into the crowd through the windshield. By the tree, some movement began. Through the fogged-up glass, Jacob Hayes made out a young man and woman. Judging by their gestures, they were clearly arguing. The woman turned away sharply, and the man grabbed her hand. "Just a minute," the old man whispered, gripping the parcel tighter. The red ribbon slipped off, and Jacob Hayes thought he saw something flicker between the old man's fingers, like a spark or the glint of a garland. The young man by the tree lowered his hands. The woman stepped back a couple of steps. Her shoulders visibly trembled. She opened her mouth as if to say something, perhaps the very last word, the one after which there is no turning back. "It's time," The old man suddenly opened the door and, before Jacob Hayes could react, slipped into the crowd. Through the glass, Jacob Hayes saw him approach the couple, and something happened. He couldn't quite make out what, but the woman froze mid-sentence. The man stepped forward, then another step, and then they were embracing under the falling snow, the festive crowd swirling around them. The old man returned to the car just as quietly as he had left, but without the parcel. Next address, the playground on Parkway Drive. We need to be there by 10:15. Jacob Hayes slowly pulled out of the alley, glancing now and then in the rearview mirror at his peculiar passenger. Too many questions swirled in his head. Listen, he finally ventured, those kids at the tree. They were about to break up, weren't they? And now it has something to do with your parcel? Well, you saw it yourself. The old man gazed thoughtfully out the window. Sometimes people just need to stop in time. Just a second before they make a mistake. But how did you know they'd be there? And at that exact moment? Turn left at Parkway, or we'll miss the next moment, the old man gently interrupted him. Jacob Hayes obediently turned but pressed on. And still, what are these moments? And why tonight? You know, the old man smiled, pulling out a second parcel from the bag. On New Year's Eve, many people think about what could have been. If only I had said it then. If only I had made it in time. If only I had dared. He fell silent, and Jacob Hayes suddenly realized that he himself often began sentences with those very words. If only I hadn't refused to visit my children last New Year. We're here, the old man's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Look, over there, by the swings, under the streetlight. On the snowy swings, someone was indeed sitting. A small, lonely figure. A boy, about 10 years old, was slowly swinging, drawing patterns in the snow with his feet. Are we waiting for him now? Asked Jacob Hayes, turning off the engine. The old man nodded, smoothing the ribbon on a new package. Sometimes the most important things don't happen in squares or under the chimes of the clock. Sometimes they happen on a simple playground when one stubborn boy just can't admit he was wrong. As if to confirm his words, a door to a nearby building slammed shut. A second boy, wrapped in a scarf, ran out onto the playground. He stopped halfway to the swings, shifting from foot to foot. Fred, he shouted. Mom said you wouldn't come to us. The boy on the swing remained silent. Only the chain squeaked louder. It's time, whispered the old man and disappeared from the car again before Jacob Hayes could blink. From his seat, Jacob Hayes saw the old man approach the swings, and then something happened. Maybe the streetlight flickered, or maybe the snow fell more heavily. The boy on the swing suddenly stopped swinging and lifted his head. David, he called hesitantly. That game you bought today. Can you really play it together? You can. The second boy beamed. I picked it specifically for that. You need to go through levels as a team. You can't do it alone. Let's go. And Mom baked a nut cake. Within a minute, the playground was empty. Only the snow covered the tracks, and the empty swings creaked softly. The old man returned to the car, this time a little slower, as if giving the taxi driver time to take a closer look. But no matter how hard Jacob Hayes stared, he couldn't figure out where the second package had gone. What on earth is going on? He muttered under his breath. The next address is Laura's Cafe on Maple Street, the old man said, as if he hadn't heard him. We need to be there by 11. Jacob Hayes knew the cafe, a small, cozy place with the best pastries in town. He often stopped there for a snack during his shifts. Wait, he turned to the passenger. But it's already closed. Laura Brooks always closes at 9. Not tonight, the old man replied calmly, pulling the third package from the bag. The cafe windows were indeed lit, though a closed sign hung on the door. Through the fogged glass, the sad figure of Laura Brooks could be seen. She was slowly wiping tables, stopping occasionally to sigh heavily. She was going to retire, Jacob Hayes recalled. Said she was tired. Her health wasn't the same anymore. Exactly, the old man pulled out the third package. This time, Jacob Hayes could swear he saw it slightly pulse, as if alive. She's given 30 years of her life to this place and now thinks it's no longer needed. That the time for small cafes has passed. He fell silent, watching as the last customer entered the cafe, a young man in glasses with a laptop under his arm. Jacob Hayes often saw him there. The man usually sat for hours with a cup of tea, typing something. Laura Brooks, came his voice through the glass. Could I have the usual? And a cabbage pie, if there are any left. We're closed, Laura Brooks replied dully, not turning around. And anyway, there won't be any more usuals. I'm leaving. I'm done. The old man silently slipped out of the car. Jacob Hayes leaned forward, peering into the cafe window. This time he managed to see the old man place the package on the counter right next to a battered notebook where Laura Brooks wrote down her recipes. You know, the young man suddenly said, I'm writing a book. It's been almost a year. And all the chapters were written right here, at this table. For some reason, I can only write here. Probably because of your pies. They smell like my grandmother's house in childhood. Laura Brooks froze with a cloth in her hands. Also, he continued, I wanted to dedicate it to a small cafe where big stories are born. When the old man returned to the car, his eyes seemed to smile faintly. Next, to Oakwood Street, House 12, he said. By 11:30. As they drove through the night streets, Jacob Hayes couldn't shake off a strange feeling. It all seemed like a dream, the falling snow, the mysterious packages, the random people whose lives suddenly turned in a completely different direction. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror at his unusual passenger, trying to figure out who he was, why he'd chosen him, an ordinary taxi driver, and why tonight. Deep inside, an unpleasant feeling churned, as if he himself had missed something important. Something that could have been said or done, but the moment had passed. He remembered the recent calls from his kids. Their voices on the phone. Dad, maybe you'll come after all? Dad, we haven't been together in so long. You know, he cleared his throat. Watching all this makes me think everyone has a moment when they can change everything. The old man silently smoothed the ribbon on the fourth package. And these packages of yours, do they fix mistakes? No, the old man raised his eyes. They just give a chance. People fix mistakes themselves. On Oakwood Street, only a few windows were lit. Near the entrance to House 12, a woman and a small girl were standing, shifting from foot to foot. Jacob Hayes recognized them. They had once taken a ride in his taxi. The girl had talked the whole way about a New Year's party at kindergarten. Sophia, he thought, and her daughter Chloe, a single mom, working 2 jobs. Mommy, maybe we still could? Came a voice through the slightly open taxi window. Chloe, we already discussed this. The woman's voice sounded tired and apologetic. A snowflake costume is expensive, and right now we just don't have. The old man pulled a fourth bundle out of the bag. This time, Jacob Hayes could almost physically feel the warmth radiating from it, like a cup of hot tea on a frosty day. You know, he suddenly said, turning to the passenger, I'm thinking, maybe there's no need for any bundles? I did well today. He reached for his wallet. The old man gently shook his head. I understand how you feel. But sometimes, what's more important is not the solution to the problem itself, but how it comes to you. Watch. The apartment building door swung open. On the threshold stood an elderly woman holding a large box. Sophia, I've been looking all over for you. The woman hurried down the steps. Remember I told you about my granddaughter who moved to Moscow? Imagine, I found her old snowflake costume. It's so pretty, with sparkles. She's outgrown it now, and it's a shame to throw it away. Maybe it'll fit CHLOE? Jacob Hayes saw the girl's eyes light up. Sophia stood frozen in confusion, clutching her daughter to her chest. God, no, and Foster, it feels awkward somehow. What's awkward about it? The costume would be happy to twirl at another holiday party. CHLOE, come on, let's try it on. When the old man returned to the car, his bundle was gone again. And for some reason, Jacob Hayes had a lump in his throat. He remembered how his daughter had also been a snowflake at a school performance once. It seemed like an eternity ago. The last address, Autumn Street, House 7, the old man said quietly, pulling out the final bundle. Jacob Hayes flinched. Autumn Street, 4. That's my address. He wanted to ask something, but the words stuck in his throat. Only now did he notice how much his hands were shaking on the steering wheel. We need to be there at 11:45, the old man added, carefully holding the bundle. We'll make it. Jacob Hayes nodded silently and turned the car around. Dozens of questions raced through his mind, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to ask them. Strangely, for the first time that evening, he felt genuinely scared. The road home had never felt so long. Jacob Hayes peered into the darkness through the falling snow, fragments of the day's events spinning in his head, the quarreling couple by the tree, the boys on the swings, Laura Brooks in her cafe, the girl with her mother. All these people had gotten a second chance. But what awaited him? When they turned onto Autumn Street, he noticed that the lights were on in his apartment. But there's no one there, he muttered. I'm sure I turned everything off this morning. The old man remained silent, clutching the last bundle tighter. Its red ribbon seemed especially bright in the dim car interior. Outside the entrance stood a familiar car, his son's car. What's going on? Jacob Hayes turned to the passenger, but the old man was no longer in the car. Only the crumpled paper bag lay on the back seat. And inside it, the last bundle with the red ribbon. Jacob Hayes carefully picked it up. It was warm. With trembling fingers, he tugged at the edge of the ribbon. Inside was a small plush teddy bear, worn and with threadbare fur, one plastic eye barely hanging on by a thread. His son had carried it everywhere as a child, unable to sleep without it. And then Jacob Hayes had taken on extra shifts to buy the boy proper, modern toys. The teddy bear ended up in the attic, and with it, their evening chats, shared walks, and quiet family evenings seemed to vanish. Jacob Hayes clutched the teddy bear to his chest and quickly walked toward the entrance. His heart was pounding in his throat. As he climbed the stairs, he gripped the toy tighter, afraid it might disappear like the other magical bundles. The door opened. His son stood there, frozen for a moment upon seeing his father, then suddenly broke into a wide smile. Dad. And we. What's that? He stared at the teddy bear, and something flickered in his eyes. Fred. Where did you find him? I've been looking for him everywhere. I wanted to show him to David, my son, today. Can you believe it? And you had him all this time. Behind him, the whole family was gathered, his daughter-in-law with her pie, and his son's wife holding little David in her arms. Jacob Hayes stepped into the warmth of his home and suddenly saw something through the staircase window. Near the neighboring entrance, in the falling snow, stood a tall, gray-haired man in a dark coat. He smiled and dissolved into the whirling snowflakes, leaving behind only a faint shimmer, like the twinkle of Christmas lights. The garlands reflected in the glass storefront, turning the small 24-hour shop into a scatter of multicolored lights. Alice adjusted the name badge on her uniform vest and, for the 100th time, asked herself what had made her agree to a New Year's Eve shift. The answer, however, jingled with loose change in her pocket. Double pay and a day off for Christmas wasn't such a bad deal. At least it's warmer here than outside, she thought, glancing at the thermometer outside the window, where the red line stubbornly stayed at -15. Rare snowflakes swirled under the streetlights, and the cars parked near the store were already covered with a thin white blanket. The last-minute holiday shoppers were buying champagne and salad ingredients, rushing, fumbling with small change, and rustling plastic bags irritably. Alice mechanically rang up the goods, habitually answering the same questions over and over. No, the pre-packaged Olivier salad ran out earlier in the day. Yes, this is the last bottle of champagne. No, loyalty cards don't apply to promotional items. By 11 in the evening, the stream of customers had slowed. Alice poured herself tea into her favorite cat-themed mug kept in the staff room and settled behind the register, reflecting on how strange it was to ring in the new year among shelves stocked with grains and household chemicals. The entrance door jingled softly, letting in a gust of frosty air and a nighttime visitor. A tall man in a perfectly tailored black coat entered the store. He moved with an astonishing grace, as if gliding across the polished parquet floor of a ballroom rather than the linoleum of a 24-hour convenience store. The visitor strolled leisurely down the beverage aisle, occasionally adjusting his dark glasses, a strange accessory for a winter night. His figure reflected oddly in the mirrored refrigerator door, appearing and disappearing. Alice blinked and rubbed her eyes. Probably just sleep deprivation, she decided. "Excuse me, mademoiselle," came a velvety voice with a faint accent. "Could you tell me where the tomato juice is?" Alice flinched. She hadn't noticed when the man had come to the counter. "Third aisle, bottom shelf," she replied, noting to herself that no one had called her mademoiselle in ages. "Near the vegetable juices?" "Thank you," he gave a slight bow. "You know, I've started a diet. The doctor recommended more red liquids." He glided again between the aisles. Alice noticed that as he passed the garlic display in the vegetable section, his shoulders tensed ever so slightly. Strange guy, she thought. And why the glasses? And that accent, like something out of an old movie. Her thoughts were cut short. The man was already standing at the counter with a bottle of tomato juice in his hands, but his reflection was conspicuously absent from the screen of the checkout terminal. The sharp clack of crutches broke the silence of their unspoken transaction. Into the store walked a girl in a long blue dress embroidered with silvery snowflakes. Despite the crutches, the upper half of her body moved with mesmerizing grace, as if she were floating through the air. The lower half, however, clearly had issues. "Fell on the skating rink," she explained, catching Alice's glance. "Both legs, can you imagine, on such a wonderful holiday?" She pulled a bottle of water from her purse and took a long sip. The strange man in the black coat froze, sniffed the air, and slowly turned to face her. "How exquisite," he began, but stopped short under a piercing glance over the top of the water bottle. The girl, leaning on her crutches and wrapped in festive tinsel for the mood, as she explained, headed for the seafood shelf. Alice could have sworn wet footprints trailed behind her. But it's snow outside. Must have just dripped from her shoes. "Excuse me," the girl tried to reach the top shelf where the canned crab was. "Could you?" She swayed, one crutch sliding across the wet floor, and for a moment something that looked suspiciously like scales peeked out from under her long dress. The strange gentleman in the coat was at her side in an instant, holding her elbow with one hand and deftly catching the fallen crutch with the other. "Thank you, colleague." The girl trailed off. "I mean, Thank you. Just, thank you. Alice glanced between them. Something wasn't right here. A rustling sound from the lower shelves made her jump. Between the rows of grains and pasta, a small figure moved leisurely, muttering something suspiciously close to. Everything's mixed up. Nothing's in order. Disgraceful. A short elderly man in a worn tweed jacket, barely reaching Alice's waist, methodically rearranged packs of buckwheat according to some system only he understood. Albert Harrison, the girl on crutches, whispered. "You're here too?" The small man turned, his eyes glinting mischievously under bushy brows. "Where else would I be?" he grumbled. "Someone has to keep things in order. Look," he gestured toward the shelves. "They've mixed all the grains, put macaroni next to rice. Chaos." He tried to reach the counter to set down a pack of buckwheat, but his height clearly wasn't enough. Jumping up, he accidentally knocked over a stack of chocolates, which clattered to the floor. A cloud of dust rose into the air. The man in dark glasses sneezed, and the glass display case behind him cracked. The girl in the blue dress, startled, dropped her water bottle, and under her hem, a shimmering tail flashed again. "Good heavens," muttered Alice. "Grab the edge of the counter." "Well, now," sighed the man in the black coat, removing his dark glasses to reveal his eyes. Naturally, they were a bright amber color. "But now this masquerade is pointless." "I told you crutches were a bad idea," muttered the girl. "We should have just ordered delivery and skipped the New Year's ball." Albert Harrison protested, brushing the dust off his jacket. "For your information, this is my first day off in half a century." Alice blinked, then blinked again. Ball? It was the only word she could manage. "The annual New Year's ball for supernatural creatures," the man in the coat explained with dignity. "Forgive me, I didn't introduce myself. Count Vincent Blackwood at your service." He bowed ceremoniously. "Although my friends just call me Vincent." Aurelia waved her hand dismissively. "I'm a mermaid from the water utility." "And I'm local," grumbled the fairy. "The whole store depends on me. But I just can't figure out who thought it was a good idea to put millet next to the wheat. Absolute disorder." Wait, Alice raised her hands. "Are you saying you actually exist? Like, for real?" "Of course," the Count shrugged. "It's the 21st century. We're keeping up with the times too." He waved a bottle of tomato juice. "I've switched to a diet-friendly menu. The traditional methods are just not in style anymore." "I'm a vegan, actually," Aurelia added. "Do you know how much plastic is in the ocean? After that, fishing just doesn't seem appealing. And I'm allergic to dust," Albert Harrison added gloomily. "Quite the inconvenience for a fairy." Alice couldn't hold back her laughter. The absurdity of the situation, a vampire with tomato juice, a mermaid, and a fairy with a dust allergy gathered in her store on New Year's Eve, suddenly seemed hilariously funny. "You're handling this well," the Count noted approvingly. "Most people faint or run for holy water." After 2 years working the night shift, Alice smirked. It's hard to be surprised by anything. Just last week, a customer demanded a refund for expired yogurt he bought at a different store. The clock on the TV, which had been playing in the background, began striking midnight. "We really must go," Aurelia exclaimed, startled. "The ball is about to start." Speaking of the ball, Albert Harrison squinted mischievously. "How about joining us? Your shift lasts till morning anyway." "But I can't leave the store." "Who's going to come here at this hour?" the fairy waved dismissively. "I told you, I'm local. I'll watch over it. By morning, everything will be in perfect order, even the shelves will be properly arranged." The Count gallantly extended his hand. "May I invite you to the ball, mademoiselle? I promise, you've never celebrated New Year's like this before." Alice looked at the clock, then at her strange guests, and back at the clock. "You know what? Why not?" The morning shift found the store in impeccable order, every shelf perfectly organized, the floors spotless, and a note written in elegant handwriting lying on the counter. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. See you at the next ball. P.S. The tomato juice has been paid for." Alice, retrieving her bag from the storeroom, smiled. In her pocket was a business card with ink visible only in moonlight, and her head was spinning with memories of the most unusual New Year's Eve of her life. On her way out, she bumped into an early customer who grumbled. "Can you believe it? Yesterday, all the shelves were arranged differently. Who works like that?" "It's all the fairy's doing," Alice replied seriously. "He has his own views on order." The customer chuckled, taking it as a joke, while Alice, stepping into the frosty air, caught a snowflake in her palm and thought that sometimes the most surprising things happen in the most ordinary places, especially on New Year's Eve.